Shumai. And basically, I'm going to bring you actually somebody else's poem. I'm going to read out Gillian Clarke. She's a Welsh poem. But basically, I think I feel very strongly about this because obviously there's a lot of racial delusions out there, and people are people no matter what country you come from. You're going to get your bad people in every country, but sometimes when I'm on the internet you'll always get this thing, Muslim people killed these people, or did this or did that, and black people did this and did that. But yeah, everybody can do just did that and just did this. So it's pointless. It's only pointing out to try and make people feel a bit more bitter towards other people, basically. And why I've decided to do this is because it's Refugee Week this June, which is from the 17th to the 21st. And basically, my piece, well, first of all, I actually think I'll read out Gillian Clarke's piece first. I hope I can read it well. And it's called Neighbours. It might not necessarily be anything to do with the Middle East, but it's certainly to do with a lot of European countries. Anyway, it's called, and it might be appropriate with all this Brexit stuff, but this is Gillian Clarke's poem called Neighbours. That spring was late. We watched the sky and studied charts for shouldering Isabars. Birds were late to pair. Crows drank from the lamb's eye. Over Finland small birds fell, song thrushes, steering north, smudged signatures on light, migrating wobblers, nightingales. Wing beats failed over fjords, each lung a sip of gall. Children were warned of their dangerous beauty. Milk was spilt in Poland, each quarrel. The blowback from some old story, a mouthful of bitter air from the Ukraine, brought by the wind out of its box of sorrows. This spring a lamb sips cesium on a Welsh hill. A child, lifting her face to drink the rain, takes into her blood the poisoned arrow. Now we are all neighbourly, each little town in Europe twinned to Chernobyl, each heart with the burnt fireman, the child on the Moscow train. In the democracy of the virus and the toxin, we wait. We watch for bird migrations, one bird returning with green in its voice. Glasnost, galach glas, a first break of blue. And obviously that is quite a sad poem because it refers to Chernobyl, which was that nuclear accident. But people seem to think that we're being invaded by like all these Muslims and stuff, but it's not actually the case. The world, through trade, money, is more interconnected than people think. There's even a McDonald's in Saudi Arabia. I think it's that one. It's either Iran, Iraq or Saudi. It's one of those three anyway. But even the television we introduced to the East, and even as far back as the 1950s, which was in Saudi Arabia. They had American management of a TV channel. And also oil dates back to the British Empire at the start of the 20th century. And of course, they too have a strong power in Western trades, like the Emirates, which is the plane company. But not only that, in football, because the Emirates sponsor the likes of Liverpool and other British football teams. They also have the Emirates FA Cup, LFC. So there's a lot of delusion. The ones that really need help are the ones that have been marginalised or, you know, looked upon suspiciously. But we could all be looked upon suspiciously. And basically, I feel quite strongly about it for quite a few personal reasons anyway. But anyway, I wrote this wee small flash fiction-y, I think it's what you'd call that. It's like a small poetic story, and it's called Gardener's World. But before I do, actually, the word weed in the dictionary, where is it? WWII. A wild plant growing where it is not wanted and in competition with cultivated plants. In other words, a weed is not necessarily like different from the rest. It's only because it's not wanted in a certain, you know, garden. Like for instance, forget-me-nots, and basically it refers to any plant. I mean, if you don't want, let's say, hydrangeas in your garden, then technically it's a weed. But the only thing about hydrangeas is that their way of spreading and yeah, is not as good as something like the dandelion, which is a beautiful, beautiful plant, a flower, let me tell you. And it means the oracle of love. It's captivated many of a child's heart. Anyway, this is called Gardener's World. A boy saw wild flowers growing so beautiful along verges, hedgerows, thickets, glades and fields. So he dug one up and planted it in his garden, in a flower bed that ran on the left as you came out from the back door of his house. The next day, in the warmth of the sunshine, the boy's mum was outside holding a red watering can, with the back door open. She tilted the spout up where the water channeled through to reach the rose that separated it into a droplet shower. She moved the can from side to side, creating a wavy S-flow, which aided the droplets to get more tucked under as they pelted to the side of the flowers. The mechanical rain journeyed along the bed to set adrift in May, a touch of a delicate splash upon asters purple. To love in the mist of a lazy day, in papery pastel blue haze, then the droplets stipple on the bright run of yellow Mayfreesia. The watering can continued to travel along the bed, as if the flowers had a personal slapstick rain cloud of misery that hovered above. Yet the desires of a sun and blue sky summer would leave the land dry and bare. And here it empties through the rose to slash upon. Two in we is a marriage of colour, of sweet William's tones of ruby, and the petals verge of white. The watering can finally came to the boy's flower. That prompted the boy's mum as she stopped the rain can shower and said, "You have missed a bit." The boy was playing in the garden on his hands and knees at the edge of the grass. He lifted his head and said, "Missed what?" His mum put her hand up to her head and, groaning a crackled sigh, "The weed that I told you to do yesterday. Look, come and see." The boy grasped a Star Wars figure in his hand as he once again looked up at his mum. His mouth twisted to one side. Is that flower that I planted yesterday?" He got up and walked over to his mum, pointing and leaning down to the flower. Look, look, isn't it beautiful?" His mum shaking her head. "No, no, son, that is not a flower, but a weed." The boy's mouth returned to the side scrunch. His eyes brightened as if a bulb lighting up with a glare. "Well, what is the difference then between a flower and weed?" The mum cleared her throat. "Listen, I still want it removed from my bed of flowers." The boy reached into his pocket and brought out his camera. "I want to take a photo first." He brought the lens of the camera in close to the small, mild, subtle petals, perhaps a diplomat of the sky's blue, as it nestled gingerly beside the sweet William. He steadied his hand for that macro shot, then glanced up at his mum and said, "It is beautiful. Do you know the name of the weed?" Whilst his mum walked off into the house, she said, "Yes, it is called a forget-me-not." The boy reclined to his knees. He had planted the forget-me-not beside sweet William, which the boy loved. His hand slowly hoed through the soil, loosening gently the weed's root system. And here is where the boy would miss, as the ghosts of story-playing figures unearthed an unravelled treasure long ago, with soil getting trapped behind his nails, a dark packed brown with a sigh and frown. Using his hands, the boy lifted the so-called weed and brought it in close to his face, tenderly revolving it in all angles, with his pupils that moved from big to small, small to big, as he tried to stay in focus. To see a mini world together with hundreds of blue to silver white pearls, making each surface of a 5-petaled corona. Then he looked at the sweet William, frowning in a gaze to see through what was before him. He wondered why these two beautiful flowers could not be beside each other. The boy got up on to one knee and continued to graze his sight as if cows munched on fresh green grass. The boy suddenly felt a small spider that crawled a tickle up his arm. The boy quickly blew the spider off and scratched. "I know, I could put this weed on the compost," thought the boy. So he moved to get up, but a few seconds later he was back on one knee and said, "Maybe not." Then, thinking to himself, the brown recycling wheelie bin might be an option, he again moved to get up, but a few seconds later he was back on one knee, thinking, a bin seems so harsh for something so beautiful. As his legs started to go numb and ache from holding his balance still, an idea suddenly bloomed in his head. So the boy thought and said to the flower, "This is what we are going to do. I am going to plant you elsewhere in the garden, in a secret, safe location." The boy got up as if the captain ordered him to stand in attention. Suddenly, a stream of pins and needles hit his leg that he had crouched upon, He could barely move as he hobbled to the back of the garden, almost laughing, a laughing hum that came and went in submissions to the prickling of a blood flow rush, light to heavy, heavy to light. The boy stamped his foot down hard to splash away the pin's needles into the air, to regain aerial perspective. As he lifted his foot back into the air, they return in a wave of vengeance, until slowly fading with each step. His head rotated around with his eyes wide, swallowing in the land. Suddenly the boy said, "Ah, that's a nice spot." He looked down to his hand and said to the flower, "I have found you a lovely new home. You will like it." There were a few stinging nettles that huddled along a wooden fence. It was relatively near a small rowan tree, and there at the back in the cool damp soil the boy planted his wild flower, and stepped back and smiled to himself, his hands scuffling up and down that slapped and bickered in passing contact, removing the clump soil and debris, flaking a slight raining patter as the bits hit the ground. The boy said to the flower, "I hope you like your new home." The sun sneakily bladed and filtered through the tree, and the small petal heads glowed a blue that held true. The boy then turned and walked off. So yes, I hope that you've enjoyed that, despite your views. I mean, there's overpopulation in all the world. But anyway, God bless the, well, I don't like to, yeah, God bless all people. That's probably a nice thing to say. Anyway, thank you. Hoel.